A massive truck barrels down a deserted highway in the dead of night. Rain lashes against the windshield, each drop illuminated by the glow of the headlights. The wipers struggle to keep up as sheets of water blur the road ahead. The hum of the engine is the only sound cutting through the storm's relentless assault. In the distance, shadows lurk, dark figures waiting just beyond the reach of the light. Jack Donovan grips the steering wheel with steady hands. To most, he's just another trucker, another weary traveler pushing through the night. But beneath the worn leather jacket and the thick layer of road dust, there's a man with a past he's spent years trying to escape. Once, Jack was an elite CIA operative. He had spent his life in the shadows, eliminating threats before they reached American soil. His hands, now calloused from handling a steering wheel instead of a rifle, had once silenced enemies with calculated precision. But after a mission went sideways, leaving too many bodies behind and too many ghosts in his mind, he walked away. Now the road is his refuge. The endless miles, the anonymity, the solitude, they're his salvation. Or at least they were, because Jack isn't as invisible as he thought. A gang of criminals has set their sights on him. To them, he's just a target, a man hauling cargo worth stealing. They don't know who he really is. They don't know the storm they're about to unleash. Think he's just another trucker. You'll be shocked by what happens next. Stay until the end to see how it all unfolds. Jack Donovan pulled into a lonely roadside gas station, the old neon sign flickering in the rain. The place was nearly empty, just a rusted pickup truck parked near the entrance, and a dimly lit convenience store with rows of empty shelves visible through the glass. He killed the engine, the rumble of his 18-wheeler fading into the night. Stepping out, he pulled his jacket tighter against the cold drizzle. The scent of wet asphalt and gasoline filled the air as he walked toward the store. The clerk behind the counter barely looked up, a radio murmuring in the background. Jack grabbed a coffee from a steaming pot that looked like it had been sitting for hours. As he poured the thick black liquid into a styrofoam cup, he felt a presence nearby. Luis El Coyote stood in the corner, pretending to browse the snack aisle. A wiry man with dark, calculating eyes, he was dressed in a cheap leather jacket that had seen better days. Jack had seen his type before. Smugglers, hustlers, men who survived by staying just below the radar. El Coyote was watching him. Jack didn't react. He had spent too many years in the field to be rattled by a stare. Instead, he casually took a sip of coffee, waiting to see what the man would do. The sound of engines rumbled in the distance. A group of motorcycles pulled into the lot, their headlights slicing through the rain. Jack turned slightly, watching their reflections in the store's glass window. 5 bikers. They dismounted one by one, rain dripping from their leather jackets as they strode toward the entrance. Jack set his coffee down, his instincts already sharpening. The leader, a stocky man with a scar running down his cheek, stepped inside first. He scanned the store before his eyes landed on El Coyote. "You seen a trucker come through here?" the man asked, his voice rough like gravel. El Coyote didn't answer immediately. He flicked a glance toward Jack, just a flicker of hesitation, before shaking his head. "Nah, no one important." Jack took another sip of coffee, setting the cup down with a slow, deliberate movement. The air inside the store grew thick with tension. The biker's eyes narrowed as he studied Jack, as if sensing something was off. Jack didn't flinch, didn't break eye contact. He had seen that look before, predators sizing up their prey. "Let's go," the biker finally muttered. "If he comes through, let me know." El Coyote gave a tight nod, and the group exited as quickly as they had arrived. Jack watched through the window as the bikers stood near their bikes, talking in hushed tones. Their body language was tense, their movements deliberate. He knew what this was. They were looking for him. Finishing his coffee, Jack pulled a few bills from his pocket and tossed them on the counter. As he walked past El Coyote, he paused just for a second. "You should pick your friends more carefully," Jack murmured, just low enough for the man to hear. El Coyote said nothing. Stepping back into the rain, Jack climbed into his truck, locking the door behind him. His hands found the wheel, fingers tightening slightly. The bikers had left, but he wasn't naive enough to think this was over. Somewhere down the road they'd be waiting. The nightmare had begun. The rain had eased, but the night remained thick with tension. In a rundown warehouse on the outskirts of town, a dim overhead bulb cast long shadows over a makeshift meeting space. A few crates, a stained poker table, and empty beer bottles littered the floor. The scent of motor oil and cigarette smoke clung to the air. Marco, the serpent, leaned against the table, fingers tapping a slow rhythm against the wood. His dark eyes, sharp as knives, studied the map spread before him. Every move he made was deliberate, calculated, like the Viper he was named after. "We hit him here," Marco said, pointing to a stretch of highway where the road narrowed between steep hills. "It's isolated. No cameras, no witnesses." Across from him, Rafa stretched in his chair, cracking his knuckles. A brute of a man with arms covered in crude tattoos, Rafa lived for chaos. He didn't care about strategy, only results. "You sure this guy's worth the trouble?" Rafa asked, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "It's just a truck, one guy." Marco's gaze didn't waver. "I don't take chances. That truck is worth millions if we strip it down right, and you saw the way El Coyote hesitated back at the station. He knows something. I don't like it." A low chuckle came from the back of the room. Sitting in the shadows, legs crossed, was the Russian. No one knew his real name, but that didn't matter. He wasn't just muscle, he was the brains behind their operation. "If this Jack Donovan is what I suspect, we need to be careful," the Russian murmured, his accent thick but his tone calm. "Men like him, they don't just drive trucks." Rafa scoffed. "You're making him sound like some kind of boogeyman. You think he's CIA or something?" Marco shot him a cold look. "Does it matter? If he is, we kill him. If he isn't, we take the truck. Either way, we get paid." The Russian exhaled slowly, considering. "Fine, but we do it my way. No stupid mistakes, no unnecessary risks." Rafa rolled his eyes but didn't argue. Marco turned back to the map, dragging a knife from his belt and stabbing it into the spot they had chosen for the ambush. By tomorrow night, this job is done. None of them realized that the man they were hunting wasn't just another target. Jack Donovan was about to turn their hunt into a war. Jack drove in silence, the hum of the engine steady beneath him. The rain had thinned to a mist, clinging to the asphalt like ghostly wisps. His eyes flicked to the side mirror, nothing but empty road behind him. Still, his gut told him something was off. He had learned long ago to trust that feeling. His phone buzzed in the cup holder. Unknown number. Jack hesitated for only a second before answering. A familiar voice crackled through the speaker. "Jack, it's Tomas." Jack's grip on the wheel tightened. Tomas wasn't just an old friend. He was one of the few people who knew what Jack really was, and he wouldn't be calling unless it was serious. "Long time," Jack said, keeping his tone neutral. "What's going on?" "You're in trouble." Jack exhaled slowly. "I figured. The man after you, Marco the Serpent, he's no amateur. You need to take this seriously." "I always do." "Listen," Tomas continued, his voice low and urgent. "Marco works with a guy called the Russian. If he's involved, this isn't just some random hijacking. These guys have contacts, military, cartel, maybe even corrupt feds. They don't just steal trucks, they eliminate problems." Jack didn't respond right away. He had spent years dealing with men like Marco, men who thought they were predators, until they ran into something worse. "They know where you are," Tomas added, "and they won't stop." Jack glanced at the mirror again. A pair of headlights had appeared in the distance. They were keeping their distance, but the pattern was wrong. Too steady, too controlled. He wasn't alone anymore. "Appreciate the heads up," Jack said, keeping his voice even. "Jack, don't be reckless. If they think you're just a trucker, keep it that way." Jack smirked. "We both know that's not how this ends." Tomas cursed under his breath. "Then at least make sure it's them who regret it." Jack ended the call and slid the phone back into the cup holder. The black SUV trailing him kept its distance, its presence a quiet threat. He could lose them now, pull off an exit, find a back road. But no. Jack had spent years running. It was time to remind the world why he had once been the most dangerous man in the room. His foot pressed down on the gas, the engine growling as the truck surged forward. If they wanted a chase, he'd give them one. The black SUV followed him for miles, keeping just far enough back to avoid suspicion, at least to someone who wasn't trained to notice. But Jack Donovan had spent years reading people, spotting patterns, anticipating moves before they happened. Whoever was behind that wheel wasn't just tailing him, they were testing him. Jack tapped his fingers against the steering wheel, keeping his expression calm as he approached a lonely stretch of highway. No cameras, no houses, just empty road and darkness. The perfect place for an ambush. He reached down, adjusting the side mirror slightly. Two more headlights appeared in the distance. Motorcycles. So this was how they wanted to play it. Jack exhaled through his nose. Amateurs? The SUV suddenly gunned its engine, closing the gap between them. At the same time, the bikers accelerated, moving up on either side of his truck. A classic box-in maneuver. Jack let them think they had the upper hand. He kept his speed steady, hands relaxed on the wheel. He could feel the tension in the air, the anticipation of men who thought they were about to make an easy kill. The biker on his left pulled a little too close. Jack struck. Without warning, he yanked the wheel to the left, just enough to clip the bike's front wheel. The biker lost control instantly, the motorcycle wobbling before slamming onto its side. Sparks shot across the asphalt as metal scraped against pavement, the rider tumbling hard before rolling into a ditch. The second biker panicked, swerving away to avoid the same fate. The SUV, realizing the situation was unraveling, made its move. It sped forward, trying to get in front of Jack's truck. If they could force him to stop, they could finish this face-to-face. Jack had no intention of stopping. His truck was heavy, but weight was power. Timing was everything. As the SUV pulled ahead, Jack let off the gas for a split second, just enough to let them think they were in control, then slammed his foot down hard. The truck roared forward. The back of the SUV barely cleared his front bumper before Jack swerved right and clipped its rear end. The force sent the vehicle into a spin, tires screeching against the wet pavement. Jack didn't look back. He knew how this would end. The SUV spun twice before flipping onto its side, skidding violently until it crashed against the guardrail. A burst of smoke and sparks filled the night air. One biker down, the SUV wrecked. That left one motorcycle. Jack's eyes flicked to the mirror. The last rider hesitated, then made the only smart choice. He turned his bike around and sped back into the darkness. Jack let out a slow breath, his grip on the wheel steady. They had underestimated him, a mistake they wouldn't make again. But the real fight was still ahead. The road stretched endlessly before him, the hum of the tires blending with the storm's distant grumble. Jack kept his hands firm on the wheel, his breathing steady. The adrenaline still pulsed in his veins, but his mind was already calculating. They had come for him tonight, tested him, and now they'd regroup. He knew their type. They wouldn't let this go. His reflection in the windshield flickered, distorted by the rain. For a brief moment, it wasn't the present staring back at him. It was the past. 10 years ago, South America. The jungle was thick with humidity, the scent of damp earth and gunpowder clinging to the air. Jack crouched behind a crumbling stone wall, his heartbeat measured, his rifle steady. Shadows moved beyond the tree line, figures slipping between the branches like ghosts. His earpiece crackled. 5 tangos, 2 with AKs, 1 with an RPG. You clear to engage? Jack's pulse remained even. Affirmative. The first shot was silent. A clean, precise kill. The second man barely had time to react before a bullet punched through his skull. The RPG-wielding target spun in confusion, searching for the ghost that had already taken half his team. Jack moved before they could. He was fast, unseen, lethal. By the time the last man realized what was happening, a knife was already pressed to his throat. Jack's grip was firm, his voice calm. "Who sent you?" The man trembled, his lips parting. A deafening explosion ripped through the night, snapping Jack back to the present. The present, the highway. A thunderclap echoed across the sky, but Jack's pulse remained unchanged. He rolled his shoulders, refocusing. The past was just that, the past. But his instincts? They never left. His mind worked fast. The gang had underestimated him, but that wouldn't last. Marco wasn't the type to let an attack like this go unanswered. If Jack knew anything about men like him, they were already planning their next move. Jack reached under the dashboard, feeling for the compartment he had installed months ago. With a quick flick, the panel popped open, revealing a Sig Sauer P226, his old partner from a different life. His fingers wrapped around the grip. It felt natural, too natural. He exhaled through his nose, sliding the gun into the holster under his jacket. This wasn't just about defending himself anymore. The fight was coming, and Jack was ready. Jack drove with purpose, his mind already 3 steps ahead. The gang had tried to box him in before, but that was just an opening move, a probe. Now they'd regroup and come back harder, more numbers, more firepower. And sure enough, trouble was waiting for him. Up ahead, flashing hazard lights cut through the darkness. The large orange road closed sign stood across the highway, forcing all traffic onto a narrow detour. Jack slowed the truck slightly, his trained eye sweeping the scene. A work truck sat idly on the shoulder, its headlights off. Nearby, two men in reflective vests stood by a set of orange barricades casually smoking. They looked the part, until you noticed the small details. The way they carried themselves, their lack of movement, the way one of them subtly turned his head to watch Jack's truck approach. This wasn't a real roadblock. It was a setup. Jack's mind raced. If he stopped, they'd close in fast, force him out, maybe try to take him alive. They still thought he was just a trucker, one they could intimidate or break. They had no idea what was coming. He adjusted his grip on the wheel. He could turn back, but that would confirm his suspicion, and they'd just chase him. He could try to plow through, but there was no telling what they had waiting down the detour. Jack needed to turn the tables. His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. No sign of another vehicle yet, but they wouldn't be far. If he was going to make his move, it had to be now. He reached for the CB radio, keeping his voice steady. Break 19, break 19. This is Black Dog heading westbound on Route 16. Anyone got eyes on the detour up ahead? A crackle of static. Then, a voice. Black Dog, this is Whiskey Jack. That detour ain't on any dispatch reports. You got company? Jack's lips pressed into a thin line. Could be. Appreciate the heads up, Whiskey Jack. Keep it steady, brother. Roads get mighty dangerous this time of night. Jack nodded to himself. He wasn't alone in this. Truckers looked out for each other. But this fight? This was his. With calculated ease, Jack reached down and flipped a switch near the dashboard. His trailer brakes. The taillights flickered as the pressure shifted, making it seem like he was preparing to stop. He watched the two men carefully. One of them straightened slightly, flicking his cigarette away. The other tapped his earpiece. Jack had his confirmation. Without warning, he slammed his foot on the gas. The truck roared forward. The men reacted too late. One of them reached for something under his vest, probably a weapon, but Jack was already committed. The semi's massive grille crashed through the barricades, sending plastic and wood splintering in all directions. The work truck's headlights suddenly blazed to life. Tires screeched as a black SUV, likely Marco's reinforcements, sped out from its hiding spot behind the fake road crew vehicle. Jack was ready. He yanked the wheel hard to the left, sending the full weight of his rig into the SUV's path. The massive trailer clipped the vehicle's front bumper, spinning it sideways. The driver overcorrected, tires skidding against the wet asphalt, before the SUV flipped twice and crashed into the ditch. Jack didn't slow down. His truck barreled through the debris, sending shattered barricades flying. In the side mirror, he saw the two men scrambling to their feet, their plan completely unraveled. But Jack wasn't smiling yet. This was just a warm-up. Marco wouldn't let this slide. Jack had just sent a message, and the real fight was still ahead. Jack drove through the night, his knuckles tight on the wheel. The ambush at the roadblock had been sloppy, too obvious. Marco was smarter than that, which meant this wasn't their real play. They were testing him. Jack had spent years in the field learning that battles weren't always won with bullets. Fear, doubt, and hesitation could cripple an enemy before a single shot was fired. And if Marco and his men still thought he was just another trucker, it was time to change that perception. Jack reached for the CB radio, flicking the switch. His voice came through calm and steady, laced with quiet authority. This is Black Dog. To the boys who just tried to box me in, let me ask you something. Static crackled in response. He knew they were listening. Do you even know who you're messing with? A beat of silence. Then a low, cautious voice. You talking to us, trucker? Jack smirked. Got you. That depends, he said easily. Are you the ones who just lost an SUV back at that fake roadblock? Silence. Jack could almost hear them thinking, second-guessing. He kept going, his tone casual, but edged with something sharp, something that cut deep into a man's instincts. See, I've been down this road before. You boys think you're the predators, that you're out here hunting an easy mark. But let me give you a little advice. Real predators don't make noise, they don't announce themselves, they don't leave loose ends. More silence. Jack let it hang, let the weight of his words sink in. Then a different voice came through, gruff, irritated. Marco. You think you're smart, trucker? Jack allowed himself a small grin. I think I'm still driving, and you're the one scrambling to keep up. A pause. Then Marco's voice turned cold. Keep talking and I'll enjoy making you beg before this is over. Jack's grip on the wheel tightened, his expression darkening. Beg? His voice lowered, calm but razor sharp. I don't beg, Marco. I bury men like you. Another pause. This one longer. Jack imagined Marco's men glancing at each other, their confidence shaken. Then Marco spoke again, but the bravado was thinner now. Forced. "Enjoy your last ride, trucker. This ends soon." Jack clicked off the radio and let the night take over. They were rattled. Good, because the next move, that belonged to him. Jack's truck rumbled down the dark highway, his mind sharpening with every mile. Marco's voice still echoed in his head. "Enjoy your last ride, trucker. This ends soon. Let them come." But even as his confidence remained steel solid, Jack knew one thing. He needed a contingency plan. No matter how good he was alone. And Marco had numbers. That meant he had to even the odds. And he knew just the man to help. Up ahead, a weathered neon sign flickered. Miguel's garage. Jack eased off the gas, guiding the semi into the gravel lot beside a rundown auto shop. The building was an old metal structure, rusted at the edges but still standing strong. A single security light buzzed overhead, casting a pale yellow glow across the entrance. Jack killed the engine and stepped out. The smell of motor oil and burnt rubber filled the cool night air. From inside, the sound of clanking metal and muffled Spanish curses drifted through the open garage door. Jack walked in. Miguel Torres stood beside a stripped-down muscle car, grease-stained and scowling at a wrench like it had personally offended him. Jack leaned against a tool chest. "Still haven't figured out Lefty Lucy, huh?" Miguel looked up sharply, then froze. His eyes narrowed. "No jodas," Jack smirked. "Good to see you too, amigo." Miguel exhaled, shaking his head. "Man, last time I saw you, you were climbing out of a burning building. I figured you were either dead or drinking in some quiet part of the world." Jack's smirk faded. Was trying for quiet. He glanced over his shoulder at the road. Didn't work out. Miguel wiped his hands on a rag. "What kind of trouble?" Jack hesitated. Just for a second. He trusted Miguel. They had run Black Ops together, fought in the worst conditions, survived when they shouldn't have. But dragging him into this, that wasn't something Jack did lightly. Miguel saw the hesitation and chuckled. "Dios mío, man. I know that look. Just tell me how bad it is." Jack exhaled. "Gang of hijackers. Think I'm an easy target." Miguel raised an eyebrow. "They still breathing?" "For now," Miguel smirked. "And now you're here because—" Jack met his gaze. "Because they're coming back. And I'd rather not fight them alone." Miguel tossed the rag aside and crossed his arms. "What's the plan?" Jack pulled a folded highway map from his jacket and spread it over the workbench. "They'll try again soon. This stretch here. Tight turns, dense forest, no escape routes. It's the perfect place for an ambush." Miguel studied the map, then nodded. "Then we make it their ambush. Not yours." Jack grinned. "Now you're thinking like the devil, I remember." Miguel cracked his knuckles. "You bring the fight to me, hermano. You know I can't say no to that." Jack felt something settle in his chest. He wasn't alone anymore. Marco and his men had no idea what was coming. The final showdown was about to begin. The night air was thick with the scent of rain and gasoline as Jack and Miguel crouched beside a row of abandoned vehicles on the side of the secluded highway. The area was perfect. No streetlights, no nearby houses, just a stretch of dark road winding through dense forest. A predator's hunting ground. But tonight, they were the hunters. Miguel finished placing a homemade spike strip just beyond the curve where Marco's gang would be forced to slow down. He wiped his hands on his jeans and looked at Jack. "They won't see it until it's too late," Jack nodded. "Good. We keep it simple. When they hit the spikes, they'll be forced to stop. We take them down before they get their bearings." Miguel pulled a sawed-off shotgun from the back of his truck, checking the shells. "And if they don't stop?" Jack patted the Sig Sauer at his waist. "Then we make them." They didn't have to wait long. A low rumble in the distance grew louder. Engines multiple. The gang was coming fast. Jack and Miguel moved quickly, ducking behind cover as the headlights cut through the darkness. The first bike zipped past, then the second. Then the SUV, Marco's command vehicle. The heavy growl of its engine sent vibrations through the pavement. Then impact. The spike strip did its job. The first bike wobbled violently before its tires shredded, sending the rider flying. The second biker barely had time to react before hitting the same trap, his motorcycle skidding across the asphalt in a spray of sparks. The SUV slammed on its brakes, fishtailing as the front tires burst. It slid to a grinding stop, its engine sputtering. Then everything was still. Jack gritted his teeth. Now or never. He moved first, stepping into the open with his gun drawn. "Step out of the vehicle. Hands where I can see them." For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the SUV's door creaked open. Marco stepped out slowly, his eyes burning with fury. Behind him, 2 of his men followed, guns in hand. "You think you're clever, trucker?" Marco spat, his voice dripping with venom. "You have no idea who you're messing with." Jack tilted his head slightly. "That's funny. I was about to say the same thing to you." Miguel stepped out from the other side, shotgun resting casually against his shoulder. "And I really hope you boys don't think about running, because I love a good chase." The bikers, still standing, hesitated, their confidence shaken. This wasn't how the night was supposed to go for them. Marco clenched his jaw, his fingers twitching. Jack knew that look. He was weighing his options. And then, he made his choice. Marco's hand went for his gun. Jack moved faster. A single gunshot cracked through the night, and the battle erupted. The first shot rang out, and time slowed. Jack fired instinctively, his bullet grazing Marco's shoulder, forcing him to stumble back with a snarl. The rest of the gang exploded into motion. Miguel's shotgun roared, the blast tearing through the knee of one of Marco's men, sending him crashing to the ground with a scream. The second thug lunged behind the SUV, returning fire. Bullets pinged off metal, sparks flashing in the dark. Jack ducked low, rolling behind a wrecked sedan. His mind worked fast. 2 hostiles still standing, Marco wounded but armed. The bikers, the ones still conscious, hesitated. They hadn't signed up for this level of resistance. Jack could see it in their body language. Uncertainty, fear. He used it. "You still think this is just a truck job?" Jack called out, his voice calm despite the chaos. "How many of you are already dead because you followed the wrong man?" Marco, crouching behind the SUV, bared his teeth. "Shut up, Donovan." Jack smiled. "You do know who I am, don't you?" Silence, then movement, too fast. Marco lunged out from cover, gun raised, finger tightening on the trigger. Bang! The shot wasn't Jack's. Marco staggered forward, eyes wide in disbelief. Blood bloomed across his back. He turned slowly, blinking in shock at the man who had fired. Rafa. The bruiser, the most brutal and unpredictable of Marco's crew, was now holding a smoking gun aimed at his own leader. "Sorry, boss," Rafa muttered, "but I ain't dying for this." Marco collapsed to his knees, his gun slipping from his grasp. He gasped, trying to speak, but Rafa had already turned away, holstering his weapon as if the matter was settled. Jack kept his own gun trained, but Rafa simply raised his hands. "I'm done, this ain't worth it," Miguel snorted. "Smartest thing I've heard all night." Jack stepped forward cautiously, kicking Marco's gun out of reach. The once feared leader of the gang was gasping for breath, bleeding out on the cold asphalt. He coughed, lips twisting into a smirk despite the pain. "So you think that this is over?" His voice was weak, but the menace was still there. Jack crouched, locking eyes with him. "I know it's not." Marco grinned through bloody teeth. "You've got no idea what you've just stepped into." Jack didn't flinch. "Then I guess I'll just have to keep driving." Marco's body sagged. Whether he would survive the night was a question for later. But Jack was already thinking about what came next. Because if Marco had bosses, then the real fight had only just begun. Jack gripped the steering wheel as his truck rumbled down the highway, the fresh scent of rain lingering in the air. The fight was behind him, bodies on the asphalt, blood in the cracks of the road, but his instincts told him it wasn't over. Marco's last words clung to him like a warning carved into stone. "You have no idea what you've just stepped into." Jack had heard men say things like that before, usually with their last breath. It was meant to instill fear, to make him hesitate. It wouldn't work. But something about the way Marco had said it, the certainty, the smirk even as he bled out, that was what bothered Jack. He reached for the CB radio and clicked it on. "Whiskey Jack, you out there?" Static hummed for a few seconds. Then a familiar, gruff voice crackled through. "Damn, black dog. Thought you'd be dead by now." Jack smirked. "Not today. You ever hear anything about Marco's crew working with someone bigger?" Silence, then a slow exhale. "You just kicked over the wrong rock, amigo." Jack's fingers tightened around the mic. "Tell me." "They're connected to something deep. Word is Marco was a middleman for someone real nasty. Not just a cartel, something older. Heard whispers about a syndicate. Ghosts. Killers who don't leave messes behind." Jack felt a slow burn in his gut. "You got a name?" "Yeah." Whiskey Jack hesitated, then his voice dropped to a whisper. "Sable." Jack frowned. "Never heard of them." "You wouldn't. That's the point. If they're after you now, you're already in a fight you can't walk away from. Jack exhaled, staring at the road ahead. The rain had stopped, but the night still felt heavy. I appreciate it, Whiskey Jack. Yeah, well, if you make it out, you owe me a beer. Jack smirked. You're getting greedy. He clicked off the radio. 3 hours later, motel on Route 12. Jack sat at the edge of the motel bed, cleaning his Sig Sauer with quiet precision. The dim yellow lamp buzzed beside him, casting shadows along the cracked walls. Miguel was in the bathroom washing the last of the blood from his knuckles. Tell me something, Miguel called over the sound of running water. When you said this was just a hijacking crew, were you lying or just clueless? Jack smirked, assembling his gun. Bit of both. Miguel stepped out, drying his hands, because from what I just overheard on the radio, we didn't just piss off a gang. We pissed off something bigger. Jack nodded. Sable. Miguel froze. Then he let out a low whistle. Shit. You know them? I know of them, Miguel said, tossing the towel aside. They're not a cartel, not mercenaries either. They're something in between. They deal in information, assassination, and business. They don't just kill people, they erase them. Jack leaned back against the bed frame, his fingers resting on his gun. Marco was working for them. Miguel rubbed a hand over his jaw. That explains why he was so cocky. He wasn't just leading a crew, he had real backup. Jack's mind worked fast. If Marco had been answering to someone inside Sable, then his death wouldn't be the end of it. The syndicate wouldn't let this slide. Miguel folded his arms. So what's the play? Jack's eyes darkened. We make the first move. Miguel grinned. Now that's the Donovan I remember. Abandoned warehouse, outskirts of town. The place was dead silent, the air stale with dust and oil. The perfect place for a conversation no one wanted overheard. Jack and Miguel entered through a side door, their boots crunching against broken glass. Inside, a man sat tied to a chair, his face bruised and his lips split. One of Marco's remaining men. The guy groaned, lifting his head. You should have killed me with the rest of them. Jack crouched in front of him. You're about to wish we had. Now, tell me, who was Marco working for inside Sable? The man chuckled, blood bubbling at the corner of his mouth. You're already dead. You just don't know it yet. Jack sighed. I'm getting real tired of hearing that. Miguel cracked his knuckles. Want me to handle this? The captive smirked. Go ahead. Won't change anything. They're already coming for you. Jack studied him. The defiance wasn't just bravado, this guy knew something. Jack nodded to Miguel. Give us a minute. Miguel raised an eyebrow. You sure? Jack's expression was unreadable. I'll handle it. Miguel shrugged. Don't have too much fun. He stepped outside, lighting a cigarette. Jack turned back to the captive, his voice lowering. You're afraid. Not of me. Of them. The man swallowed, his smirk faltering. Jack leaned in. Tell me what I need to know and I let you walk. The captive hesitated. Then he broke. A woman, he muttered. They call her Vega. She was Marco's contact. She's the one who gives the orders, who keeps the machine running, and she's already sent people after you. Jack filed the name away. Where is she? The man's lips pressed together. If I tell you that, I'm dead anyway. Jack pulled his knife, cutting the ropes that bound the man's hands. Then disappear. Get on a bus. Go somewhere quiet. If I find out you stayed in town, I won't be this generous again. The man looked at Jack, eyes filled with wary confusion. Then he bolted. Miguel stepped back inside, taking a drag from his cigarette. That's gonna come back to bite us. Maybe, Jack admitted, but we got what we needed. Miguel exhaled a stream of smoke. So what now? Jack tucked his gun into his jacket. We find Vega before she finds us. Miguel grinned. And when we do? Jack's expression darkened. We end this. The fight with Marco's gang had just been the start. Now, Jack was going to war. Jack and Miguel left the warehouse, stepping into the night air. The sky was clearing, but the storm hadn't truly passed, not the one they were in. Miguel glanced sideways at Jack. You really think letting that guy walk was a good idea? Jack slid into the driver's seat of his truck, firing up the engine. If he's smart, he'll disappear. If he's stupid, he'll run straight to Vega. Miguel smirked as he climbed into the passenger seat. And that's exactly what you're counting on, isn't it? Jack nodded, pulling out of the lot. We don't have time to sit back and wait for them to come to us. Sable's people aren't the type to knock on the door and give us a chance to fight back. They'll come at us sideways, hit us where we don't expect. Miguel leaned back. resting his shotgun against his leg. So what's the move? Jack's mind worked fast. He had dealt with high-level operators before, people who pulled the strings, the real players behind the game. Vega wasn't some street-level thug. She was the kind of person who planned 5 moves ahead, who never let herself be exposed, but everyone had a pattern. She's going to want to assess the damage, Jack muttered. Marco was her guy. He's out of the picture now, and she needs to know how bad the situation really is, which means she'll send someone to clean up the mess. Miguel raised an eyebrow. And we follow the cleanup crew back to her. Jack gave a small nod. Exactly. Miguel grinned. I always loved a good stakeout. Jack kept his eyes on the road. This wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about finishing what Marco started and making sure Sable knew Jack Donovan wasn't someone you came after and lived to tell the tale. Jack stood over Marco's slumped form, the night air thick with the smell of gunpowder and rain-soaked asphalt. The fight was over, this fight at least. Miguel nudged one of the fallen bikers with his boot. Well, that was fun. Jack exhaled, rolling his shoulders. Yeah, a real party. Rafa, now the last conscious member of Marco's gang, stood a few feet away, hands raised, watching the scene unfold. He was smart enough not to make a move. Jack gave him a measured look. You got 2 choices, Rafa. You walk away and disappear, or you stay in this game and end up just like him. He gestured to Marco's bleeding form. Rafa held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded. I ain't stupid. Without another word, he turned, mounted one of the still-functioning bikes and sped off into the darkness. Miguel smirked. Think he'll keep his word? Jack shrugged. Doesn't matter. If he's smart, he'll stay gone. He glanced down the road. The horizon was starting to lighten, the first hints of dawn breaking through the night. But even as the storm faded, Jack knew this wasn't the end. Marco's last words still echoed in his mind. You have no idea what you've just stepped into. Trouble was coming. Bigger trouble. But Jack had been running from his past for too long. Now, he was ready. He climbed back into his truck, the familiar hum of the engine grounding him. The road stretched ahead, endless as always, but this time he wasn't just driving away. He was driving toward whatever came next, and he wasn't afraid. Want to see what happens next? Subscribe and drop a comment below. Rop.